Good afternoon. My name is Jose Francisco Trevino Gallegos. Today I'm going to talk about how the English military forces participated in the second most important front at the beginning of World War II, the North African Front. The war started in 1940 and lasted for 3 years and a half until 1943, where several fights throughout the European colonies in northern Africa took place. The Axis powers were Italy, Nazi Germany, and Vichy France. These countries used their colonies to attack other European colonies in Africa, such as Egypt or Sudan. Italy had Libya and part of the East Africa under their control by the 1940s, surrounding English colonies for an attack. Vichy France had a big chunk of territory in northern West Africa, like Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. The Allied powers was the British Empire, Free France, and the later addition of the United States. As we can see on the map, the European power in Africa was balanced between Allies and Axis powers. The Axis objectives in the campaign were mostly Italian-oriented. Benito Mussolini's rise in the Italian power turned him into a fascist leader who surged the old glory of the Roman Empire into this new fascist Italy. This ambition of resurrecting the Roman Empire was such that he started the plans for an African invasion. As Mussolini once said, the Mediterranean will turn into an Italian lake. And with the help of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany, he decides to accomplish it. Trade routes were important to the Italians, and most trade routes were controlled by the English Empire. The most important trade route was the Suez Canal in Egypt. Oil supplies in the Middle East and North Africa were important acquisition to whoever controlled the land. The casualties in the North African campaign reached to almost a total of 900,000 human losses. Britain suffered the most deaths, around 35,000 in the battlefield, even though they did not have as much troopers on command as Italy. 250,000 to 350,000 Italian soldiers were captured by the Allies throughout the campaign. German and French soldiers were the next biggest casualties. The desert battlefield implicated a new challenge to all the participants in war. Different difficulties were presented in war. For several field marshals, Africa and the desert were an ideal place to fight a war due to their open view and lack of obstacles. For Axis powers, most of their supplies will have a slow delivery by their ally due to the sand and the long distance to deliver them. To Italians, it was a difficult and lost fight due to their lack of knowledge of the landscape and the England tactics and position superiority. I will give a resume of the Desert War by years and explain the English moves that led the Allies to the victory. The war started in the last months of 1940, with the Italian army relocation to the west of Libya and the decision to attack the frontier of Egypt and Libya. The Italian commander, Rodolfo Graziani, was the leader of the first attempt to invade Egypt, and their knowledge of the land gave them the advantage. Even though the Italian forces outnumbered the English forces, the experience of the English army were supreme, and their knowledge of the land gave them the advantage. The lack of fast deliveries of supplies like food, water, and gas stopped the Italian army in several points of the battles. The long distance and excessive amounts of need for supplies made almost impossible to last several attacks. 250,000 men and 350,000 Italian troops were deployed in the North and East Africa respectively. 36,000 and 50,000 troops were on the side of England in Egypt and Sudan. The English had the aid of their colonist armies like the New Zealand and Egyptian armies. As 1941 started, the conflict escalated when England started Operation Compass. This operation lasted until February of 1941, pushing the Italians to Libya and capturing some of the cities in their boundaries. The English took thousands of Italian soldiers as war prisoners. After seeing a successful operation by the British, Adolf Hitler decides to aid his allies and started the Operation Sunflower. Operation Sunflower was sending the Nazi troops to Africa as a form of help to the Italian division. Hitler drafted one of his best field marshals and one of the greatest in the history, the Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, to lead the Afrika Korps, a German military division in the north of Africa. The English started to use their heavy machinery. The English aircraft and navy was deployed, and Australian, Indian, and Sudan Army Division were on the side of the Allies. Three of the most last-longing major officials in the war in the side of England were intercepted by error and took as prisoners. It was a back and forward between Germany and England. Germany pushed back England from Libya to Egypt, and England did the same thing until the end of the year. One of the greatest tank battles started and Axis forces retreated to Benghazi. 1942 started to see the beginning of the end of the Desert War. Once again, the Axis forces pushed back the Allies to the city of Tobruk, but the lack of supplies stopped the Germans to continue. By June of the same year, Allies were once again pushed back to Egypt and entered their cities with their divisions led by Erwin Rommel. Tobruk showed one of the worst battles defeats in the recent English history when they see themselves surrounded by the Axis forces. The city suffered a giant raid. By July, the Allies win the first battle of El Alamein, elevating the morale of the British Commonwealth. Winston Churchill sent a communique and allies with the new participants in the war, the United States, and formulated a plan in East Africa to defeat the Axis powers. The name of this plan was Operation Torch, where British, American, and Free French armies arrived throughout the Air Sea into West Africa and take major cities Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia as headquarters for the next attack. The Vichy France took the side of the Axis powers in this new campaign and put their territories as Axis territories. Churchill sent the commander Bernard Montgomery to the front line in Egypt and kicked out the German forces from Egypt once again, leaving them with only 30 tanks and a defeated Rommel. By November, Rommel escapes from getting captured and Operation Torch starts. By the end of 1940, Operation Torch was successful to arrive in the west of Africa, and English participation slowed down thanks to the arrival of the American military. The forces that arrived in the West Africa arrived in Tunisia and Algeria. The cities of Oran and Algiers was where the British landed. The Axis powers hold Tunis in 1943. Rommel leaves the continent back to Europe, where he was accused of conspiracy against the Nazi regime. Montgomery's division arrives from Libya to Tunisia. By May of 1943, the English and Indian divisions did their last attack and penetrated the Axis defense in Tunisia. Finally, after 3 years and a half, the Axis powers were defeated by the Allied forces on May 9 of 1943. The Desert War was over. The outcome of the war was the stop of the war in the North African front line. For the Allies, this successful campaign started another one on the coast of Italy, with now a strategical position to attack fascist Italy. Massive casualties and material losses were suffered by both sides. Libya, a former Italy colony, changed its administration to an English administration. The removal of the Axis menace made English Middle Eastern territory a safe place to keep their oil reserves. This was everything for the topic.